Hello, I am Arms Bells, and this is a guide on how to use guns in Grand Archive. Now let's be honest here. You chose this deck because you either like girls with cat ears, or because of the fact that you like girls that shoot guns. Or you just wanted to shoot Merlin and Lorraine in the face. But then, if you're a new player, you realize that guns are different from swords. They need to be loaded, and then you need to use bullets, which can cause a bit of confusion when interacting with other stuff. Yeah, so most likely here, because he had an opponent that's going in response, I will, to loading, or to guns, or to before attacking, and whatnot, and it's just getting you too confused about what's happening over on the game. So here's the simple and comprehensive guide to everything about guns and Grand Archive. I will also be including timestamps in the description if there are only certain parts you want to know about guns. So to start with the very basic stuff, this is a gun. Guns are a type of object in Grand Archive. You have to load a gun before you can attack with it, and it cannot be used with an attack card. Guns are also a type of regalia, and must be played from your material deck. Then to load a gun, you must play a bullet card from your material deck or hand. Then you must rest a bullet to load it into an unloaded gun that you choose. In this example, I will be resting plated bullet to load it into the prototype pistol. Then to show that you have loaded the gun with a bullet, you place that bullet right underneath the gun. And there you go. Your gun is now loaded. So now you're wondering, what happens to the loaded bullet once it's in the gun? Let's start from the beginning. You will both have your prototype pistol and plated bullet on the field. Loading is an activated ability, so when you rest the bullet, the ability goes on the stack. When you activate the ability, you choose an unloaded gun to load the bullet into. Once the bullet is loaded, it is in a special loaded zone that's attached to the gun. The bullet is technically not in the field, and when it's in the loaded zone, it cannot be targeted by abilities or spells and cannot be unloaded from the gun. But the gun itself can be targeted and can be interacted on the field. So to help to explain this, we'll start with something that you guys understand with. Champions. So we have Spirit of Fire on the field. Then we level up the Spirit of Fire to level 1 Diana. When you level up your champion, you never say, I'm going to attack your Spirit of Fire, or I'm going to target the Spirit of Fire. It's always, I attack Diana, or I target Diana. You never interact with the Spirit of Fire. You always interact with the top card, which is Diana. This works the same way with loaded guns. The bullet cannot be interacted with, but the gun can be interacted with. An important thing to note is that all guns must be unloaded to be able to activate the load trigger. I mean, what era do you think we're in? The 21st century with full auto guns? Airsoft is literally stuck with dueling pistols, muskets, and bolt-action rifles. Just do it like an honorable duel like John Wick did in the 4th movie. But anyways, to identify an unloaded gun to a loaded gun, on the left is an unloaded gun, because it doesn't have a bullet behind it. On the right is a loaded gun, because it has a bullet in it. But of course, with every rule, there are exceptions. With force load, you can load a bullet even into a loaded gun. Force load will directly take a bullet from your material deck, and will directly load it into any gun, even if it's loaded. And now you can see, both bullets are loaded into the same gun. Though if you do happen to own a gun and more than one bullet, please do not try this at home! Now for how guns work in combat. You have both your awake champion and a loaded gun on the field. Then, to declare an attack, you rest your champion and say that using your gun, you're going to attack another unit on your opponent's field. When you do, the bullet immediately goes into the intent zone. To figure out how much damage is being dealt, you add both the attack stat of the gun and the attack stat of the bullet, and any modifiers along with it. So for example, if the gun into this turn, it will get a +1 attack for the turn. So with its base attack of 1, plus the bullet's base attack of 2, plus its modifier of +1, it's going to be 4 damage this turn. Then you remove a durability counter from the gun. And of course, if the gun has no more durability counters, it gets banished. If force load was used to load 2 or more bullets into a gun, then both bullets will go to the intent zone, and both attack stats will be applied, and both abilities. In this example, Penetrator round will add 0 attack, but will make all damage unpreventable. But this ability only happens if your champion is a level 2 and a ranger. After combat, if the bullet is a non-regalia card, which is shown by the yellow cost on the top left, it will go to the graveyard. And if the bullet is a regular regalia, as shown with the blue cost on the top left, it will go to banishment. But a regalia bullet with renewable doesn't go to the banishment. Instead, it returns directly into the material deck. And congratulations! Now you know every basic thing about guns and bullets and Grand Archive. So now let's get into the nitty-gritty on how to interact with guns and bullets. This will be in the perspective of you facing an opponent with guns. So let's start off with the easiest one. What happens if you use Song of Frost during the combat phase? Song of Frost will immediately end combat, which will banish everything else on the stack. Since combat damage doesn't get calculated, your opponent will not remove a durability counter from their gun, and the bullets will go through the same cleanup as usual from before, where non-regalia bullets go to the graveyard, and where regalia bullets with renewable go to the material deck. Now then, for interactions, where if the gun is destroyed or suppressed while loading. These sorts of interactions use the stack. For all intents and purposes of this video, I'll only be talking about each spell and effect that For all intents and purposes, I'll only be briefly talking about how the stack works. If you want to learn more about how the stack works, please check out Clem's video in the description below. When your opponent rests your bullet, they are activating the load ability, and that ability goes into the stack. Then before the load ability resolves, you play Zephyr, targeting the gun they're trying to load. And for the stack, the last card or ability resolves first, so your Zephyr is going to resolve before the load ability does. When Zephyr resolves, it's going to suppress the opponent's gun, which means the gun is banished until the end of the turn. So when the load ability tries to resolve, it sees that the gun is no longer there. When that happens, the load ability fizzles, which means that the load ability has failed to resolve. So the end result is that the gun is no longer on the field, but the bullet remains on the field rested. There are some pros and cons to this. The good thing is that the gun is no longer in the field and cannot be used for an attack. If it's suppressed, the gun is only off the field for that turn. The bullet will stay rested for the turn, which means it cannot be loaded into a different gun. The downside is that if you suppress the gun, it will come back next turn, and the bullet can still be used on your opponent's next turn. Now then, what happens if you try destroying or suppressing the bullet instead? So let's go back to the stack from before, but this time your Zephyr targets the bullet instead of the gun. But regalia bullets have renewable on them, so when the Zephyr tries to suppress it, it's going to attempt to bash it. But instead, the bullet is going to go into the material deck. When it does so, the bullet will stay in the material deck until your opponent materializes it again. And now since there's no bullet to begin with to load into the gun, the load ability is also going to fizzle. Now for pros and cons. One pro is that the bullet is no longer in the field, and if it's renewable, it's going to be stuck in the material deck until it's rematerialized again. Now the cons. If another bullet is on the field, it can still be loaded into the unloaded gun. And if the bullet is renewable, your opponent can still bring it out during the materialization phase. Now see what happens if you destroy or suppress an already loaded gun. The simplest way to say this is that if the gun is destroyed or suppressed, the bullet just dies. And of course, non-regalia bullets go to the graveyard, but bullets with renewable go, to the banishment? Not material deck? Well, the reason why is because renewable requires it to be on the field or intent to be able to go to the material deck. But since it's in the loaded zone, it won't go to the material deck. It gets banished instead. And pros and cons. Pros, well obviously this is the best scenario. You got rid of the bullet, and the gun is no longer in the field to do an attack, even if it's just for a turn because it's suppressed. But there's one very huge problem with this. If this is occurring during your opponent's main phase, then you most likely wouldn't be able to do this. Your opponent will have opportunity after the load ability resolves, which means they can do anything they want, including attacking with the gun they just loaded. And by then, it would already be too late to do anything unless if you have Song of Frost, because the attack is already going through. So unless if they load something like Shadow's Twin, which causes a triggered ability to go in the stack, which you can respond to destroy the gun, you barely can't do anything. This is why, if it's during your opponent's main phase, you should always do something before the load trigger resolves, not after. Now that should be all the basic interactions, right? There's nothing more, right? Now enter the water player with one card. Fracturize. Because yay, Fracturize loves to give exceptions to everything. Now let's see what happens if we fracturize a gun while loading. Now we're back to the stack, but instead of zephering the gun, we're going to fracturize the gun. And now the gun is a fractal. And because the gun is now a rock instead of a gun, the loadability fails because it needs to load a gun, not a rock. And now on the opponent's field, they have a fracturized gun and a rested bullet. This has the same pros and cons as if you suppressed or destroyed a gun while loading, except that the opponent can also now use the fractal to pay for the yellow reserve cost on cards. Now let's see what happens if you try to fracturize the bullet while loading. So going back to the stack, you are now playing Fracturize, but this time you're targeting the bullet. And now we end up back here, and you're thinking to yourself, this is the same thing as if we destroyed a suppressor bullet, except now the bullet is a fractal instead. Then at the end, you expect the gun to still be on the field, but the bullet to be rested in a fractal. But I'm sorry to break it to you, this is not what actually happens. The gun is still loaded, and the bullet is in the gun, and it doesn't lose all abilities. And you must be asking me, but why is it like this? This is the reason why I said that Fracturize loves to bring exceptions to the rules. So let's go back to the stack and see what happens after Fracturize resolves. The load ability of the stack will check if the original card that created the ability, which in this case is Plated Bullet, to see if it's still on the field. It doesn't care if the bullet is no longer a bullet. It just wants to see if it's still in the field. And if it is, it will still attempt to load it into the gun. Since the gun is still there and is still unloaded, the bullet will still load into the gun. And when it does, the bullet returns back to normal. Which means we end up with a gun that is loaded with the original bullet, and the bullet is still a bullet, not a fractal. Yes, this interaction sounds counterintuitive, and this is the reason why people don't really want to deal with Fracturize. Now let's see what happens when you try to fracturize an already loaded gun. When we do, the gun turns into a fractal, and since the plated bullet is still in the special loaded zone underneath the gun, it's still going to stay there. Because of that, it's going to be stuck in the fractal. You can't unload the bullet from the fractal, and you can't reload the bullet into a different gun. It's still really just stuck in a rock. And congratulations, this is the last Fracturize interaction we can have. Hooray if you got this far ahead. Now if you want to learn more about Grand Archive, or you want to just fight against other Grand Archive people, join the Grand Archive Discord. There are a lot of helpful people that can help you learn how to build decks, or play decks. They even competitions hosted by the devs to give you some very cool merchandise and free stuff. If you ever want to talk to me in the Discord, just come down to the Lake channel. I usually be there. The invite link will be in the description below. And if you're wondering what the lake is, maybe have a look for yourself. And thanks for watching. May the refurbished trusty steed guide you on your future gunslinging combat.